So you may have noticed over the course of this series that I'm a bit of a cynical asshole. I'm running a review series, and the highest score I've given out so far is a whopping 4.5 out of 10. So yeah, I'm a bit of a critical asshole when it comes to looking at creepypastas, but that hasn't always been the case. Back in the day when I was a bright-eyed lad, just getting into this fandom, I actually liked a good amount of stories that I heard and read. This was before I realized how much of a trash fire this whole genre was, mind you. But still, it happened. And today I feel like I need to take an impromptu trip down memory lane to cover a story I used to hold in high regard. That story is known as The Pocket, and there's a good chance you've heard of it. The Mr. Creepypasta narration of it has over 200,000 views, and there's numerous other narrations out there with thousands of views as well. If you haven't heard of the character or the story before, you've definitely seen the image associated with it. Yeah, you've definitely seen this picture before, if you've been into creepypastas as long as I have. This story was at one point my favorite creepypasta in general, but as time has gone on and my tastes have gotten more refined, my love for The Pocket has faded. And upon rereading it, I can confidently say, like a toxic ex, I'm glad I let this one go. I'm excited to cringe at this story 13-year-old me loved, so let's just jump right the fuck into it. So our story begins, as most creepypastas do, with nameless protagonist, my beloved, explaining that there were rumors going around about an old abandoned silo on the edge of town. He explains that apparently the silo is haunted by the spirit of a vengeful farmer who hung himself in the silo. He then says he thinks that rumor is bullshit because no one he's heard it from has been able to cite their sources in MLA format. Now, this line about him thinking rumors are bullshit completely fucks with the continuity of the story, but we'll get to that when we get there. Right now we have to introduce the main cast. So Nameless here and his three friends, Pete, Meg, and Wes, decide to check out the silo to see if it really is haunted or just a great place to get tetanus. They go out on an overcast day to enhance the creepiness of the experience, which sounds like a great idea, honestly. Every time I go out to find a new hangout spot, I always want to feel like I'm entering the house from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Anyway, our protagonist describes the uneasy feeling that fills the air as he and his friends draw closer and closer to the silo. Curious, we walked towards it as our laughter, along with our talking, died down. The closer we got to it, the colder it felt, as if there was some sort of cold, dark aura radiating from it, sending shivers down our spines. The author then makes a frankly horrific grammatical and formatting error when he ends the previous sentence with hell, then finishes the thought in the next paragraph when he describes that Wes yelped like a little bitch when they got closer to the silo. So it's supposed to read hell, Wes let out a little yelp, but instead it's just so wrong. It reminds me of the line from A Close Encounter with the Tales doll. I ran into the new paragraph ass room. But unlike that story, where the paragraph break is clearly a mistake, here it's fully formatted and everything. So like the author was entirely confident in typing it like that. Enough with that little tangent though. Our protagonists start to climb up the side of the silo because, like I said earlier, they all really want tetanus. And realize there's a latch at the very top that isn't locked. So like good little future chalk outlines, they waltz their way right inside the supposed haunted silo without a second of hesitation. Once inside, they find themselves in a small room with not much inside besides a couple hay bales and a hole in the center with a rope descending into it. So the group, really striving to get that coveted Darwin Award, decides to scale down this rope into the utter darkness. Nameless is the first to reach the bottom and pulls out his flashlight. He's the only one that brought a flashlight, by the way, and shines it up at his friends. But something catches his eye as he does. As they descended, my eye caught something covering the rope. The color of it was red. Unfortunately for his friends, Nameless here isn't using the giraffe expert's fuel rod cannon. So they didn't notice the fact that the rope is covered in blood. And instead of doing something rational like, I don't know, telling his friend that the rope they just climbed down looks like a prop from Evil Dead 2, he decides to not tell them anything. Instead, he shows them this cool hatch he found in the ground that leads them deeper into the silo. Pete opens up the hatch, and at this point, I'm pretty sure the author is actively trying to make these characters look like the dumbest motherfuckers on Earth because, as Nameless puts it, Pete opened it up, revealing a dark hole. Now, the fucked up thing about it was, it reeked of death. Like, Do they need a literal flashing neon sign in bold letters saying, "Spooky demon down here will eat you"? Like, there's being curious and then there's actively putting yourself in danger for no reason. They didn't even have a motivation to do this for real. Not a very good one, at least. Like, if they wanted to find a cool hangout space like they mentioned earlier, just stay at the top of the silo. It seemed alright up there. And if they wanted to figure out if the place is haunted, I'm pretty sure the reeking scent of death and the blood-soaked rope is more than enough evidence to point to. But the characters in this story have the common sense of a deficient wombat, so they hop into the hole and find themselves inside a tunnel. They walk through a frankly ridiculously long tunnel and end up at another hatch that opens up into an empty concrete septic tank. However, as soon as they open the hatch and let light into the tunnel, they hear a loud shrieking noise. Having promptly shit their pants, they scramble into the septic tank away from the shriek. They close the hatch and lock it behind them before they try to climb out of the top of it and into a random forest. But the pocket is on EPO, so he literally punches through the locked hatch and grabs Wes. They hear Wes scream as he's dragged back into the hole before being suddenly silenced. As they hear the pocket tenderizing Wes's corpse with its fist, the others panic and try to get away. However, they find out that the area around the septic tank is completely enclosed by fences topped with barbed wire. Oh no, barbed wire. That's way worse than the literal demon that just ripped your friend in half. Frankly, unless the fence is also covered in nitroglycerin and is surrounded by a moat full of crocodiles and sharks, I'm just gonna risk going over the fence. So after realizing they're completely trapped, as barbed wire is the end-all be-all, they decide to hide, as it's starting to get dark, and the protagonist states that the creature only comes out in the dark. Except he first started chasing you guys when you shined light into the tunnel, and he seemingly had no problem snatching Wes when it was still daytime. Literally nothing has pointed to the pocket being only able to move in the dark, but fucking whatever, I suppose. So the three remaining butt buddies hide, with Nameless and Meg climbing up a tree and Pete scampering into a hole in the ground. Nameless then sees the pocket as it emerges from its tunnel. I also, to my regret, got a better look at the creature we were facing. It was the most grotesque thing I have ever seen. Its face was like a mask, pale white against its dark skin. The face seemed to only have 2 dark holes for eyes, and a large smile stretched across its face. After a few moments of observation, I had soon noticed that it was a mask made from Wes's skinned face. I was scared shitless as the thing was crawling towards Pete. I can't accurately express how nostalgic I feel reading that, honestly. I don't have any real criticism of this paragraph. I just really wanted to read it in a serious way. It's my channel. I'm allowed to indulge in myself sometimes. Anyway, the pocket here immediately finds Pete and just fucking wrecks him in like 2 seconds, for real. Then the creature's chest splits open and from inside pours dozens of blood-soaked tendrils. Sometimes I miss the old days, when creepypastas weren't so hyper-aware of cliches. The tendrils rip Pete's head off and put it inside the pocket's open chest cavity, before the cavity quickly seals shut. The mask made from Wes's face disintegrates, only to be replaced by a new mask made of Pete's skinned face. Which, not gonna lie, is a pretty neat visual. The skin swap is quickly followed by the pocket speaking in a low, raspy voice. I am the pocket. Before slinking back into his tunnel under the septic tank. Now that he's down to 2 friends and the only expendable character left is a female, Nameless decides that now is a good time to leave. Nameless grabs the barbed wire fence. Somehow, he doesn't immediately die because I was led to believe that standard issue barbed wire was coated in cyanide and HIV-positive blood, and pulls it, making an opening for Meg to escape out of. As Nameless is escaping himself, the pocket shrieks, which causes Nameless to panic and cut himself as he escapes. Now that they're past the fence, the two run to civilization, and nothing of note happens for the next 10 years apparently. I guess no one ever asked where Pete and Wes went, and I guess the pocket is completely incapable of jumping a fence. Unless the fence is magic or something. But if it was, the tunnel still opened up into the silo, which wasn't surrounded by the barbed wire fence. I guess the pocket would have failed middle school PE. Also, side note, why the fuck was there a barbed wire fence in the middle of the woods anyway? Was it built around the abandoned septic tank? The geography of the story is giving me an aneurysm. Also, earlier when I said the line, "I say these rumors are bullshit," fucks with the continuity, is because of this massive time skip in the story, and the fact the author is writing the story in the past tense, meaning that the main character had already experienced the horrors he witnesses in the tale, makes this dismissal of the legend at the beginning seem completely out of place. It's almost like that weird shift that occurs in Watch for Wandering Towers, but a little less egregious. Almost over. Anyway, so yeah, at some point during those 10 years, Nameless and Meg got together and were happily married for a while. Until today. Nameless then explains why he is telling us this story. Meg's decapitated corpse was discovered on the outskirts of the forest, well beyond the silo and the barbed wire fence. I guess it only took the pocket a decade to realize he's a literal demon and that a barbed wire fence won't kill him immediately. So yeah, the pocket is free now. And Nameless is telling us his story and looking at a picture of him and Meg's wedding, when he suddenly sees something. It didn't help, because in the reflection of the glass I saw a face slowly coming towards me. Meg's face, only it was eyeless, and had that damn terrifying smile. The pocket. It's here. It has come to take me. Then the pocket shoves its fist through Nameless's chest, and in a moment of clarity, post-chest punch clarity, if you will, Nameless realizes the pocket kills people to free them from the world, and that he himself has been freed. Which is some straight-up Jeff the Killer edgy bullshit, honestly. The story ends with a simple line, implying the pocket has gained a new DLC skin. I smiled. So that was the pocket. And it definitely was a thing that occurred. In all seriousness, though, despite my somewhat cynical commentary throughout, there are a couple things I do like about this story. So before we get into the nitty-gritty and all the dirty, bad stuff, let's talk about the stuff I actually enjoyed. Namely, the titular antagonist, the pocket. Before we get to old Pock over there, let's talk about some other aspects of the story I really enjoy. Namely, the setup of the story itself. Creepypastas, in their inception at least, were basically ghost stories told through the internet. So it's nice to see a story utilize the classic urban legend setup that this story uses as an opener. Along with this, a few details to the urban legend that we are given at the beginning give us enough information to piece together some interpretations of what the pocket is and where it comes from, without giving anything specific away. The paragraph also draws doubt to the story being legitimate, so it lets the audience know while there might be some truth present within, that they should take it with a grain of salt. I don't have a clever transition here, but man, I want to talk about how effective the gore is in this story. Now, I'm not really into gory stories, at least not in written form, as what usually happens in creepypastas that are explicit in their violence is they usually overindulge. They provide gory detail after gory detail, which after a while just gets really boring and kind of gross, but not in an unnerving way. However, the use of gore in the pocket is handled really well because it strikes a good balance between overtness and subtlety. Gore in the story is presented in brief descriptions, but through effective word choice like sharp snapping and tearing of flesh, it implants visceral images into the reader's head without beating us over the head with it, like some fucking stories. Brief and effective gore that doesn't overstay its welcome is, ironically, a very welcome change. I think part of what makes the gore presented in this story so effective is because of the monster the story describes doing the horrific acts in question. So let's finally talk about the pocket itself. I've talked about creepypasta OCs in this series before, when I covered both Burner and Rusty Fingers. However, in those two examples, these characters and their stories are hilarious failures. So bad that they're not even worth examining, to be honest. The Pocket is not that. The character is genuinely the best part of the story, and he's hard to put into any singular creepypasta archetype, mainly because he's an odd mixture of traits from other creepypasta characters. He's got the supernatural abilities and the presence of someone like Slenderman. He's got the color scheme, large smile, and even the one-liners of Jeff the Killer. And he has the brutality and animalistic characteristics of the Rake. And these traits are blended together to make a new and wholly effective monster. The other aspects of the story I've mentioned before also play into the character as well. Unlike Jeff the Killer, where his origin is the entirety of the story, or Slenderman, where his origins are so obscure that any theory is essentially blind guessing, we're given enough information to make educated guesses as to what the Pocket is and where it comes from. Along with this, the sheer physicality and brutality of the Pocket sets it apart from other creepypasta monsters. He's described as slamming through locked hatches, punching through people's chests, and tearing them apart with his bare hands. And I think that really works with the character. He's clearly supernatural in nature, but not supernatural in a hand-wavy way, where he can just do whatever the story needs him to do. He has powers, but he relies on physical strength and ferocity to kill. Now, there are still problems with the character, obviously. The bloody tendrils are silly. The fact he's somehow trapped in a random fenced area until he decides not to be anymore, and the super edgy motivation that is revealed in the last paragraph are all pretty bad. With that said, I still think the positives outweigh the negatives for this character. Now that I've gone over what I like about the story, let's talk about the stuff that's, not that great. Holy good God in heaven, these characters are awful. They are thankfully better than the cunt from the Walmart story, as they're not entirely insufferable, but that's probably because their personalities are as thin as rice crackers. They're completely blank slates with no characteristics defining them, apart from Wes, whose character trait is that he's a pussy bitch. Literally, I don't think I could name one personality trait for our nameless protagonist. Well, except for, the fact that he's really fucking stupid, like every other character is. Like, goddamn, I don't think I've met a dumber band of characters in a creepypasta. Like, say what you will about the giraffe guy walking into a savannah at night by himself. That's stupid. But at least he had the hindsight to bring a fucking flashlight, unlike 3/4 of the people in this group. Also, the African savannah didn't literally smell like death. They're essentially just bodies of meat thrown into the story so the Pocket has something to viciously murder. But their lack of personality and incredible idiocy makes the audience immediately not care for them in the slightest. So when the Pocket does eventually punch through them like Ricky O, the reader is completely unaffected, because they're completely unattached to these loafers with legs. Another downside to this story that can't really be ignored is the actual writing. It's not particularly great. The story is full of clunky or choppy sentences. The punctuation is messy. Ellipses are overused to the point of absurdity. The tenses in this story are it's like an episode of Doctor Who with all the time traveling going on. And overall, the story's prose is just not great, except for, again, the very brief descriptions of violence. The writing is very bland and uninteresting, using very simple language and repeating certain words to the point they eventually lose all meaning to me by the halfway point. The last problem I have with the story is, well, the story itself. It just isn't very good. It starts off with a fairly great setup with the urban legend aspect, but as soon as they actually get to the silo in question, it throws the whole concept to the wayside in favor of generic slasher movie set pieces, which can only occur through the plot convenience and the stupidity of our main leads. The characters descend into a tunnel that reeks of death because if they didn't, the plot couldn't happen. The Pocket doesn't kill them as soon as they enter the tunnel, because then the plot wouldn't happen. Both the Pocket and the main characters can't hop a barbed wire fence because the story would be over. They're only able to hop the fence when the plot requires them to be able to. The story doesn't flow well because it's not really written as a cohesive story. It's written as a bunch of set pieces the author thought up in his head, then constructed a flimsy narrative around. The story it's just straight up a mess, to start to finish. And speaking of finishes, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't mention the ending. Yeah, it's one of those stories where the story ends with the monster scraping at the door. However, in this story, he's not scraping at the door, he's scraping at the inside of the author's ribcage. Even among people who like this story, including young me, this ending is pretty ridiculous and hard to excuse. It's just really dumb imagining our protagonist typing away as the Pocket's fist is poking out of his sternum. It also adds that ridiculously edgy motive to the Pocket's character that just feels like every serial killer motive in every piece of media since the 1990s. The ending is just a complete mess, honestly. Anyway, I intended for this episode to be shorter than the last one, so let's finally cut to my final thoughts. So this story is, despite there being a couple good aspects within it, just not very good. Even then, in hindsight, the things I actually enjoyed are vastly overshadowed by the quality of the story itself. The plot is a mess, the characters are as dumb as rocks, and by God, did it need a couple rewrites and some proofreading. It's a story with a good setup and a strong antagonist that fails to live up any of the potential and should be left in the past where it belongs. With that said, you might still be wondering, how does this story stack up to the other Creepypasta OC stories I've covered in this series before, namely Burner and Rusty Fingers? It blows them out of the water. Did you even fucking watch the video? This is infinitely better than both of those stories. Never ask me anything ever again, you stupid dick. I give it a 4 out of 10. Overall, it's a bad story, but it has a couple good features that keep it from falling into the same category as something like Giraffes or Walmart. See you around, Pocket. Thanks for the memories, even though they weren't so great. Anyway, thank you guys for watching once again. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have a suggestion for a story that I should tear into, leave it in the comment section below. It was fun to sit down and reread a story that I remember loving when I was younger. Next episode is another fan suggestion covering a subgenre of creepypasta I haven't really looked into before. So keep your eyes out for that. See you guys later.